Good morning, friends, and welcome back. I thought I would take a clear glass plate for today and show you how I turned it into this. And even though this plate is for decorative purposes, I will tell you how you can turn this into a plate that you can actually use if you'd like. Here's what I did in order to get started. I sell these vintage rose papers, they're roses and carnations actually, on a site called Zazzle. And in this particular case, for this project, I'm going to cut out some of these flowers and I'm going to get rid of that whole dark background. And two things that will make this a lot easier to cut is if you take a little bit of a thicker piece of paper and put it behind this, because it is tissue paper, it's a little bit stronger than a napkin, but it's still so thin it's difficult to cut. And the other thing you would want to use are these small curved scissors. The links are down below this video so that you could go over to a site called Zazzle, which is where I sell my papers. And by the way, if you'd like to use my papers and sell things at craft shows, that's fine by me. Just please don't reproduce any of the papers. And the links will be below for all of these products. Something else I wanted to mention, because a couple of viewers asked me about this, my website goes through Amazon. And it really helps me when you purchase your supplies through my website. But the other thing is, you can purchase everything that you would like from Amazon while you're on my site. You don't just have to buy what I have listed. You could just continue to do searches and purchase whatever you need. So you don't have to sign out and go back in. You can get everything taken care of in one fell swoop. So I'm going to cut all of this flower out, or the center vintage rose with a couple of carnations around it. And before I decoupage it onto the surface, now remember, we're working on the back of the plate, so the paper needs to be facing forward. But what I want to do here is I'm just going to move it in a couple of different areas and see where I like it the most before I decoupage it down. And now I am applying decoupage glue to the front of my paper. This is napkin decoupage glue, by the way. Some of the, there's a really popular brand of decoupage glue that I'm not wild about. It's just too thick. And another problem with it is it can leave shiny spots on glass when you're looking through it from the front. And what I mean about that is, even though glass is naturally shiny, if you're looking through the front of this plate and you're using this other thick, heavy decoupage glue, there are spots that almost look like they're still wet. And you could have this plate for a year and look at it and say, it still looks like there's a wet spot in there. So it's an inconsistent finish, and you may not be crazy about it, but if you use a napkin decoupage glue, that will eliminate that problem. So I prefer the napkin decoupage glue. And I'm just going to cover the back of this. Now that I have the decoupage down, I'm going to cover the back of it. And before I let it dry, I'm going to do one other thing. I want to take a damp, lint-free washcloth and just kind of carefully go around the edges here and remove any of the decoupage glue so that that decoupage glue is only on the paper. And you don't have to get too carried away with this. It's clear, it will dry clear anyway, but I'm adding some other paints and things to the background here, so I just want to make sure there's no brush strokes or anything like that from the decoupage glue. Now I put this aside to dry, and then I took a flexible toothbrush like this, and some people use a paintbrush to splatter paint. You want to make sure you experiment a little bit with your paint. You can use chalk paint, you can use acrylic paint. We're going to be covering the back of this plate anyway. So what I'm doing here is I'm just practicing with this toothbrush. Now I used a color because I'm trying to go with a monochromatic vintage type of look. I kind of wish I would have used a darker brown color because it barely showed up. But it really does make a difference. It adds to the vintage look of this plate. If you take your toothbrush or whatever tool you're using to splatter your paint and go all around the outside here. If you're making this plate to be used as opposed to a decorative item, you can use dishwasher safe decoupage glue. You just want to read the instructions on that because they are different from regular decoupage glue. And now I'm going to put this aside to dry, and it will dry pretty quickly. And now that it's dry, I am taking this triple thick glaze spray, and I'm just going to spray it in little areas. I'm not covering the whole back, I just want to make it very tacky. And I am adding some glitter. You may want to skip this step, but it really does catch the light. If you have the plate in an area and someone's walking by and they tend not to notice it, but if something is sparkling or glittering out of the corner of their eye, they're going to look at it and say, that is really pretty. Also, if you're giving this to someone, let's say you're going to a holiday party and you want to take some cookies or dessert, give this plate as a gift to your hostess. Not only is it a very considerate idea, the hostess is usually really excited that they got this new gift and you've made it from your heart, so it's even that much more special. So I put that aside to dry, and here I took regular old tissue paper and I am stamping on this with, now this is where the mixed media comes in. I am using dye ink. You want to make sure it's not pigment ink, but it is dye ink. And use your stamps. You can stamp in any direction you want because we're going to be tearing these out and decoupaging them over the back of the plate. And even though most of us have rubber stamps hanging around the house, I'll still have some on my website along with this dye ink. And you can use the heat gun to dry these. They dry pretty quickly, but I'm just going to do a quick shot with the heat gun to make sure they're all dry. And I'm also going to be using some of my smaller stencils. And again, I'm using the ink, the dye ink, but I'm not going to use the whole stencil, just parts of the stencil. And we're going to be tearing these out and applying these also to the back of the plate. So here's how the plate looks right now. It looks pretty just the way it is, but we need to add some things to the back. So what I did was I tore out all of those stamps and the stencils, and I want to play around with these before I glue them down to make sure I like the positioning of them. So let me play around with this, and you can play around with your plate and see first where you would prefer the stencils to be. Now, depending on the color papers you're using, you may want to use different glitter. Different colored glitter. You may want to use different colored paint to splatter on there. You can hardly see the white, but it's so subtle I can still see it, and I like it. It was actually a cream color, but it tended to kind of get lost with this white tissue paper in the background. So now what I'm going to do is I'm happy with where I'm going to place all of my papers, and I'm going to take the decoupage glue and apply it to the front of the tissue paper. And I'm applying it on the tissue paper as opposed to the glass because I have some glitter down there and I don't want that to get onto the brush. It can get a little sticky, as you'll see here. So I then just applied the paper face down, and I'm going to go around the rest of my plate and apply a bunch of these different papers down. And by the way, I did not cover the whole plate. You can cover it if you want, but we're going to apply a coat of paint to the back of this anyway. So I'm just going to apply papers all over, kind of sporadically. Once I'm all done covering the back with all of these papers, remember to face the papers forward. I am going to set this aside to dry. And if you've overlapped anywhere around the plate, you want to take your nail file or any type of a file and pull the file in one direction just to file away all of that excess. I'm also going to take that dye ink pad and go all around the edges of the plate along the back. It's going to stick really well to the paper parts. You won't see it as much on the glass parts, but that's okay. It still adds to the charm of this looking like a vintage piece. And by the way, you do want to hit this for a couple of seconds with your heat gun. Now that everything is dry, I am taking some chalk paint and I'm going to cover the whole back of this. You can use acrylic, but especially if you would like to use this again and again, you really want to stick with the chalk paint. That acrylic paint can kind of get a little bit lumpy if it gets too hot in a dishwasher. It can also bubble up. So unless you're using dishwasher safe paint, which Martha Stewart makes, you would want to stick with the chalk paints. And you do want to cover the back of this because it's too sheer otherwise and you won't be able to see your work. So here's how the back of the plate looks. Don't worry too much about those lumps. That's because we layered some of the papers and we're going to cover that up so that the back looks presentable. And here is how the front of this looks. So you can see how you really needed that chalk paint in back of this in order to make all of your designs pop. You really want to make sure this is thoroughly dry before we move on to the final step. So now that the plate is all dry, I'm going to take a pouncer brush and I'm also going to use that Viva Decor Maya Gold paint. And this comes in different colors. It's called Maya Gold because it's a metallic paint. It works beautifully on the back of these plates. And rather than paint this on, you do want to dab it on because it then gives it a hammered metallic look so that the back of the plate is almost as pretty as the front. And once you've covered the whole back of the plate and let it dry, here's how it all looks now that it's dry. We want to take that same triple thick glaze top coat and spray the whole back of this just because we want to make sure everything stays in place on this plate. And there's one thing I wanted to show you just in case you're wondering, why did we need the chalk paint? Why couldn't we just put this beautiful metallic finish paint over the background? I'll show you why that is, but I also wanted to tip the plate in a few different directions under the light so that you can see it actually picks up some of that rich color from the back. Just a little bit of it shows through. Look at this other plate that was also clear glass. I used the exact same paper on the back and omitted the chalk paint like I used here. Same exact papers, but you can see how this really pops, how it jumps out. There's some depth to it. So some of these smaller steps that you may want to skip, this one is too important. You can see the flowers just get completely lost on this plate. By the way, I soaked this in very hot, very soapy water for about 15 minutes and this all came off. And finally, here is how our finished plate looks. I'm going to show it in a couple of different lights and a few close-ups so you can see where everything is and how the glitter looks and things like that. And you may want to play around with a few different a few different plate stands. So here's how this looks close up. You can see our mixed media, the glitter is in there. I'm shining a little bit of light on here so that you can see the glitter a little better. And if you have this in a certain area of your house, depending on the time of the day, the sun is going to hit it or certain lights will, and you'll get to see that glitter a lot more. And here's where all of our stamps and stencils are. And again, don't forget, these make really nice presentations if you're bringing some type of a dish or dessert over to someone's house. The bigger surprise comes when you empty the dish and everyone says, "Where did you get this plate?" And you'll be really proud that you made it, and your hostess or host is really going to love it. So thank you again, my friends. That has been our video for the week. I hope you enjoyed it. And Upcycle with Decoupage also has its own page on Facebook. If you go over and like and follow the page, you'll be notified every week when I put a new video out. Thank you so much for subscribing. I do read all of your comments and compliments. Thank you so much, you guys. I will see you next week with another video. Thanks again, friends. Bye-bye.